Hey! We did it! Completed the game. Awesome. Alright. First things first. The bottom center of the screen says that we've beaten 96 games this year. And 418 since we started doing this in 2020. Those numbers are now lies! We've now beaten 97 games in 2023 and 419 since we started doing this in 2020. Awesome. All right. I have a lot of thoughts about this game. I have a lot to say. I feel like I do. So let's start with the good. The art direction is obviously derivative, but it is still awesome. It's very clearly Tim Burton stop motion inspired. Corpse Bride, Nightmare Before Christmas kind of a thing. It's Coraline. Well, I know Coraline's not Tim Burton. You know what I mean. It's got that heavy vibe. Heavy. That's obviously its inspiration. And it does a good job of it, you know? I mean, it's obviously like a B-team version of that, but it still does a good job of capturing that aesthetic, which is probably particularly difficult in a video game. As far as I know, it's never been done. So maybe it has, but it's never been done this well. I would venture that that's a safe bet. So that's great. The art direction really carries it all. I mean, it's a big part of what makes the game fun to explore. The combat. I did not know this was a card battler. I mean, that's not quite right. That conjures a certain image that this isn't, but it's got a card system in the combat, and that, for me, was super fun. I really enjoyed collecting the cards, switching my deck around, making sure I had a deck that worked well for me, collecting the currency to buy more cards. That was a lot of fun, and that's really drove me to through the game. Really, that was the vehicle for the game for me. I was like, I want to get my deck perfect. That's really satisfying for me, so I'm going to get as much currency as I can. I'm even going to do some side missions and yada yada to get more currency, to get more cards. I loved that gameplay loop. That grind was really fun for me. The story was pretty excellent. I would say it definitely felt like a theme, a plot that would be at home in a movie. Like if this totally could be a movie. Absolutely. If they wanted to make they probably never will, but if they wanted to make a Lost in Random movie, it could definitely work as a movie. The story was, it had some interesting nuance and some interesting moral themes, and the characters were strong. I thought the main protagonist is a strong character. The people you meet along the way, some of the enemies had, some of them were pretty one-dimensional, like, oh, just they're straight up evil. But a lot of them weren't. A lot of them had. They were strong. They were well voiced. They were the voice work was excellent. They were well written for the most part. That was really good too. So most of the things about this game I think were successful. Largely, this game absolutely exceeded my expectations. I hoped I would like it. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. Was it an absolute masterpiece? No, and I will tell you why. There are a few problems with it, some of them big. Let's talk about... within the combat was mostly pretty good, but it was a little slow at first because when all you can, you're without getting going into any spoilers, your options are very limited at the beginning. Your cards are very limited, so there's really only a couple of things you can do per turn, and so the battles are pretty slow at the beginning. It takes a while to kill anything, and it's a bit tiresome at first, but as you go on and you build your deck and you can roll higher numbers and yada yada, the combat really starts to pay off. In fact, toward the end, I was really feeling OP. I had a perfect deck. I was so much stronger. So that was but it did, just because of the inherent nature of the way that the game is designed. I'm not sure what they could have done about this, but the combat at the beginning is quite slow. So I can see how probably a lot of people would have fallen off of this game because the combat wasn't very rewarding at first. More on speaking of on the combat, when you're actually the camera is horrible, which during the game doesn't usually matter too much because maybe you're behind something you can't see very well, whatever, but it's during a cutscene or you're just exploring the town or whatever. It's not that big of a deal. But in combat, it's horrible, man. The camera drifts toward certain enemies even though you're not locked onto them. You get into these places where the camera is just there's just a pillar between you and your character, or the camera and your character, and you just can't fucking see them. The camera zipped around, moved around unnecessarily and in weird ways. It was hard to see, to be able to have control of seeing like where the enemies were at certain times. The camera was real bad, and some of the combat is broken. It's there's this one particular charge attack. Well, there's this one particular charge attack with what happens to be the best weapon in the game, where 90% of the time, even if you're point blank, you charge the thing and it just goes around them. It just doesn't hit. Like the hitbox is fucked up or something. And so they should have fixed that. That was just straight up broken. So there were a couple of things like that during the combat just didn't really work very well. But that was the best example of that. Also, so that we've got a bad camera, we've got some weird broken combat mechanics. The game did this thing that some games do, where every time you talk to someone important, the screen would go black, everything would reset, and it would enter the cutscene. I guess this is something that some developers do for the sake of some kind of convenience on the back end, where anytime you want to enter a cutscene or a dialogue thing, everything fades to black. Everyone moves into the positions that they're supposed to be in behind the scenes, and then the dialogue option starts. Well, it was, first of all, it's jarring. It fucks with the pacing. It's slow, it's monotonous, it gets old really quickly, all that stuff. But on top of that, the worst part is there are certain times where it's not just dialogue, it's whenever certain just events happen, and some of those events are right in the middle of combat. And so, like, for instance, one of the types of fights in this game is that you're trying to move a board piece to a certain, like a board game, trying to get it to the end by doing certain things in combat. And every time the dice moved, everything would go black. In the middle of combat, everything would go black. It would show the dice moving, and then it would fade to black again, and then it would go back into the combat, and you're getting railed by some enemy because it just takes you completely out of the fight. And on top of that, you remember those charged attacks I was talking about? Well, all the weapons have charge attacks. If you try and initiate a charge attack, and you would, just the way that this game is, without going into too much detail, the only smart choice is to start a charge attack before the camera or the timer starts running again. That's the only smart move. And every time you try and do it during one of those board game type fights, which are plentiful, there's a lot of those, you just don't get to do it. Would just interrupt the charge attack and you just wouldn't be able to do it. It was just absolutely broken. So there's a few things, especially with combat, that there are just glitches in this game that just bugs that just weren't addressed, and some of them are real bad. Like it renders some of the attacks just absolutely pointless and useless. So that's a bummer. You know what, the cutscene thing where it fades in and out, you know what it reminded me of? Lord of the Rings Gollum does that too, where every time you want to talk to someone, everything goes black, and then it fades back in, and the dialogue starts, and your dialogue options show up and all that. Lord of the Rings Gollum did that too, and it was highly annoying. It was anytime you wanted to do anything, it's starting a cutscene, or it's starting this thing, and I think it's a lazy development option. I think it's like a lazy development choice that like makes things easier for them on the back end, but it's really jarring and messes with the pacing really bad. And I think Crisis Core does it too. I can't remember. Is it Crisis Core? There's games that I've played there's a lot of games that I've played that do that, and they're usually like more like indie or AA games. Most AAA titles, like whatever, they have the money or the resources not to have to do that. But it's a sign of a cheaply made game. Really, sorry, I'm losing my voice. Most things about this game did not seem cheaply made, but that was one of those things that really did. And the fact that it even not only was it tiresome and weird, but it also messes with combat. That's unacceptable. Like, you gotta fix that, you know. So that's disappointing. And then also the let's see. We talked about the camera, the combat being broken, the cutscenes. And then last thing that I can think of right now is there are also. I hate to compare this game to Lord of the Rings Gollum because it is 50,000 times better than that game. This is a great game overall, but it had some of those weird, buggy, glitchy issues. And one of the ones that it had that Gollum also had is that, what is the song? Is that you would get stuck when you're running. You just get stuck in a corner or like in part of the environment. It's like if there's like you're turning a corner because there's this brick and you're rounding the brick, and you just, even though you're not really touching the brick, you just get stuck on the brick. And you're just trying to run, and you're just running in place. And that would happen in the middle of fights a lot. And you would just get hammered by the enemies because you just get stuck in place. And I never got stuck to the point that I had to restart or anything. But I would get stuck long enough that I would get hit. And then usually when I got hit, it would knock me out and I'd be okay. But it did affect combat. Yeah, a lot of times you could dash out of them. But it happened a lot. Sometimes it was just when I was walking around exploring the city, and I would just get stuck for a few seconds. And, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it was annoying. And then when it happened in combat, it kind of was a big deal. I died a couple of times, I think, because of that. This is definitely an example of a game that has a lot of really awesome things about it and a few really bad things about it. But the good news is that the good things about this game were way, way, way better than the bad things were bad. As bad as some of them were. The game overall was very satisfying to play. Really just enjoyed the gameplay loop. Really enjoyed the story. Really enjoyed where it was going. I did a lot of side content in this game. A lot more than I do in most games. So just being willing to live in this world longer than I have to is... That's high praise for really any video game. So, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And the way that it resolved was pretty satisfying without going into any spoilers. It was a satisfying ending. Really start to finish, the story was pretty excellent. Like if they've made a movie out of this, I would watch it. And I'd let my kids watch it. I enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. Overall, this game is going to rank. It might be top 100, which I know that doesn't sound that high, but like that's, especially after this year when I've played so many great games. Now that I'm just playing whatever games I want, I've played so many good games. If it makes the top 40 of this year, like that's a pretty big deal. I mean. In 2020, when you go around the 40 range, those are games like the original God of War, the original Silent Hill, Atomic Heart, Guardians of the Galaxy. Those are great games around the 40 mark. So, I would say I liked it at least as much as those games probably. Really good, really enjoyed it. All right. That's it. Let's continue. We can continue. Is it going to do that thing where it's like your event? No, that felt like this is not one of those games where you can play after the credits. We beat the game. It's over. It's done. We did it. Yeah, we got a save file. All right, cool. Last order of business. Lost in Random. It has been a joy. But we are now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. Bye-bye. Bye.